Superintendent Mr. Grishman for joining us tonight. We always appreciate your support. Thanks for being here. So I just want to start off by saying, one of the things that's the most special to me about middle school is the rapid rate of change that you will see your kids go through the next 3 years. If I show you a picture of a 6th grader, your kids now, and then them in 8th grade, you might not even recognize them in 6th grade. The change is that quick. So they say that the quickest stage of development in a child's life is actually birth to age 2. And then after that, it's between ages 11 and 14, which is middle school. So what we do at the middle school is we're really conscious of that. We're aware that kids are changing quickly and they reach milestones at different rates. And our course offerings match that as well. So what you're going to hear a little bit tonight are our science and math course offerings, which change. Different kids will take different classes in 7th grade in math and in science. So that's what we're going to be here to discuss tonight. So without further ado, I want to introduce my colleagues, Ms. Kriegstein and Ms. Libertini, our Curriculum Associate for Mathematics and our Curriculum Associate for Science, who are going to host the rest of this evening. Thank you very much.
So I'm going to begin by introducing myself. My name is Kim Libertini, and I'm the K-12 Curriculum Associate for Science and Technology Education.
And I'm Helene Kriegstein, the Mathematics Curriculum Associate here in Jericho K-12. So welcome. We clearly didn't need the auditorium, but here we are.
If you haven't had an opportunity, there is a QR code that gives you a link to all of the slides this evening, so this way then you could follow along. We also want to let you know that this presentation is being recorded and will also be posted on the district website, so you'll have full access to any of the information that we provide. So the goals of this evening, as we examined some of the requests of the parents to review what our programs are like, we figured that one of the most important things for us to do is to explain the difference between what we call off-grade acceleration, or OGA, and single acceleration. OGA is sometimes called double acceleration. We also want to identify what are the criteria that we use to evaluate whether or not a child is academically ready for OGA. We want to discuss what is the structure of the OGA math and science assessments. And the largest part of this evening's presentation is for us to discuss the pathways in terms of coursework that students that are either regular pathway, double accelerated or OGA pathway, or single accelerated, what courses will they choose and be exposed to along the way? And lastly, we're here for you. We're here to answer a lot of the frequently asked questions that have come our way over the years and or you posed in the survey that Mr. Gleason kindly hinted at.
So we would like to go over some reasons that we hear about from students when discussing acceleration. So one of them would be, well, my friends are doing it, so I want to do it.
Someone told me this is what should be done.
I really want the opportunity to take more advanced classes.
I think this puts my child at an advantage.
Everyone is doing it, and I don't want to be left behind.
So one of the things that we really want to focus on is what should acceleration be for? Students should have demonstrated that they are academically ready, right, and that they are mature enough to handle the coursework.
We do want students to have the opportunity to take the highest level of courses that they can. Off-grade acceleration in math and science leads to multivariable calculus or AP Physics C. So those would be conceivable reasons why one would want to off-grade accelerate.
So let's just review what OGA, or double acceleration, really is. When is this offered to our students, and what is the performance criteria that we require for OGA? So the first thing that I want you to understand is that OGA, again, is what we consider a double acceleration. In other words, students are taking high school coursework 2 years prior to when they normally would. It is typically offered, our first opportunity for OGA is offered in the 7th grade. That's for both math and science. And the performance criteria for OGA, we look at a series, right, of data that identify whether or not the student is academically ready. So we're examining report card grades, right? We're looking for A's in both math and science. We're looking at classroom assessments. How is your child performing on formative and summative assessments throughout the curricular year, right? What are the performance levels on the NWEA, math, science, and ELA? Okay, and then lastly, we identify students' academic readiness by their performance in the AMC 8, which the date for this year's assessment is there, as well as on the Science OGA placement test, which is in March.
Now, in addition to what Ms. Libertini went over, all of those data are quantitative data. We also look at qualitative data in the form of a rubric. So I'm not going to read this to you, you have access to it. But these mathematical practices and science and engineering practices really have to do with habits of mind, how students are in the classroom. Can they construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others? Are they engaged are they cognitively engaged from evidence to make conclusions about science? How do they choose what tools to use, a compass, a protractor, etc.? Can they engage in mathematical modeling and see patterns? So those types of things we're not going to see on a test, but they are very important when considering the maturity level and the academic readiness of students who are going to accelerate 2 years beyond grade level. So let's move into the pathways. I'd like to start with this math pathway. This is a regular pathway, the non-accelerated pathway. So I just want to point out, thank you. Just in case you needed a review of what was discussed. Okay, Math 7 and Math 8. Keep something in mind when I go to the next slide. This is the regular pathway. So students who are in a regular pathway, which is perfectly fine, and they will have access to just about all of our courses. They take Math 7 in 7th grade, they take Math 8 in 8th grade, and then they move to Algebra 1. Algebra, Geometry, and Algebra 2, everyone needs to take those courses. Those are the 3 Regents courses. Every student takes them. It culminates in a Regents exam, non-negotiable. That's part of our high school curriculum. When I move to the accelerated slide, you're going to notice that there's not Math 7 and then Math 8, because what will happen is those 2 courses will be combined. So Math 7 and most of Math 8 will be taught together in a 7th grade accelerated program. I will show you that in a moment. I do want to draw your attention to the green box that says Algebra 2, right? Remember I said those 3 Regents exams, Algebra, Geometry, and Algebra 2? If a student is not accelerated, they do have an option to co-enroll in a pre-calculus course for half a credit. So those of you who are ultimately going to be making a decision after grade 6, which is heterogeneously grouped, there's no acceleration in 6th grade, you are going to have to make a decision as to whether you want your child to be accelerated or not in 7th grade. What I want to assure you of, if you decide that your son or daughter is not going to accelerate in 7th grade, in Jericho, they could re-enter this pathway later in high school by co-enrolling in pre-calculus, or another option is to take a summer class after Algebra 2 at a local college or university. The reason why I want to emphasize that is because I don't want you to think that you are making a mistake or that you're making a decision when your child is only in 6th grade to decide what path he or she will be on for the rest of their high school experience. It's very important to us that we have multiple pathways. So even if your child is single accelerated, you will see that in the end, in that blue box, those are our calculus courses. They still have the opportunity to take those calculus courses. Now I would like to compare single accelerated with double accelerated. And I see the cameras going. You're welcome to take pictures. I just want to remind you that this is going to be posted on the website, but feel free. So let's look on the right-hand side where it says accelerated in grade 7. You will see at the top it says Math 7S. That class covers all of Math 7 and about 2/3 or maybe even a little bit more of Math 8. So it's truly accelerated. You're basically learning 2 years of math in 1 year. So after Math 7S, you go to algebra, geometry, and then what I described. Algebra 2, if you're single accelerated and you would like to double accelerate or off-grade acceleration, you have the opportunity that I talked about before. You could co-enroll in pre-calculus. If you stay with Algebra 2 and you don't co-enroll with pre-calculus, you're going to go to our pre-calculus or pre-calculus research class, which is a fantastic class, by the way. And then you will have an option of taking one of our 3 calculus classes, either College Calc, Calc AB, or Calc BC. If you choose to co-enroll, and this is important, okay? You are going to need to go to AP Calculus BC, because the reason why you would co-enroll at that point is to take multivariable calculus. There is no other reason to double accelerate. The only reason to double accelerate is to have the option to take multivariable calculus, and of course be challenged during the other school years, but the end game is that multivariable calculus. So multivariable calculus begins where AP Calculus BC ends. Most high schools, the vast majority of high schools, end the sequence at AP Calculus BC. Most schools don't offer multivariable. Multivariable is a college, it is equivalent to a Calc 3 in college. So those of you who may be mathematicians, we're talking about calculus in multivariable. So partial derivatives, multivariable calculus. So rather than dealing with one variable, we're dealing with 2 variables. And then we're also doing vector calculus, gradients, curl, bend, the types of math that you would be encountering in science and engineering classes. So it's a very, very high level calculus class. If students double accelerate and wind up taking Calculus BC, what I find is that we have a number of students who are trying to exit Calculus BC in 11th grade and get into another calculus, and that's going to leave them with a hole in their schedule in 12th grade. They could always take an elective, but they will not be continuing the calculus sequence. I point that out because I think a lot of students think they're going to be at an advantage by double accelerating, and they're not going to be at an advantage if they need to pull out of it early and then have no place to go, right? So the point of double accelerating is to take more math and have opportunities for more advanced classes, not to finish early. The other thing I want to point out, if you look in the OGA column and the regular accelerated column, you will see that both have the opportunity to take multivariable calculus. And that's really what I want to emphasize. The pathways are important because I don't want you to feel, again, like you're making a mistake if your child doesn't choose to accelerate, or if your child is not chosen for a double acceleration. Just to make sure that it's, well, I was going to say clear, but I hope this isn't too confusing. This is everything I discussed all on one page. So it's really just showing the different pathways in a single document, and I understand it'll probably take some time to digest, and you may have questions about it, but the important point is that, again, you will have access to our advanced classes whether you accelerate in 7th grade or not. There are opportunities to get to our most advanced classes.
So just like Ms. Kriegstein described to you, we are going to start with the regular or non-accelerated pathway in science. In science in grade 7, the students will learn the foundations of life science in grade 7, and then they'll move on to our grade 8 science course, which studies earth science. Again, this is a foundational course, which is very different than the Regents courses that I'm about to describe. Students then would follow into grade 9, where we would take our Regents, Earth, and Space Science. If you have a student that is currently in the high school, they may have taken what's called Earth Science, Regents Earth Science. The name of the course just recently changed as of this year, but it is essentially the same level. It is the New York State Regents course for science in that area. In grade 10, they would take Regents Life Science Biology, and again, that would have replaced a former course, which maybe you have students that took, which would have been the Living Environment. They move on to Regents Chemistry in grade 11, and then in grade 12, they have these options of taking Regents Physics, AP Environmental Science, AP Bio, AP Chemistry, or AP Physics 1. The important thing to note here is that just like in math, there are 3 non-negotiables. The students absolutely, for a New York State diploma here at Jericho, based on our programming, need to take Regents Earth and Space Science, they need to take Regents Life Science Biology, and they must take Regents Chemistry. Those are the 3 non-negotiables before they can move on to any of our advanced coursework. What's important to note here is that if a student was following along on the regular pathway in science, starting in grade 7, but then realized that they did want to access the single accelerated pathway, we give an option to take a summer college chemistry class. Now you might be asking yourself, well, why can't the option be given in grade 9 to take that summer class? And the reason why is because it's college level chemistry. There are college regulations on the age of students that should be enrolled in those courses to deal with chemicals, and there needs to be a certain maturity level. And we've dealt with a number of colleges that we do approve to meet these needs, but it has to occur in the summer of their 10th grade year to meet the college requirements of age. Once a student then would take that in the regular pathway, that now puts them onto what we'll consider the single accelerated pathway. And I'll compare it in a moment, just like Ms. Kriegstein did. Okay, and then that gives them the option to again take any of our Regents level physics, but also access to our AP coursework. It's also important to note that sometimes students decide that really later in life they realize, you know what, I really want to pursue something in the sciences, and they want to double up. So I have a handful of students that do take multiple sciences. There are restrictions and constraints for that. It really goes into, there's a 9-period day, and how many periods can I devote to my sciences, and include all of the math that Ms. Kriegstein wants them to take, right? And also all of the other electives and or coursework in the other disciplines. So it's really important that we be thoughtful about whether or not that fits in the student's profile. And those conversations really happen with the guidance counseling team. And they do a fantastic job at helping the students to examine their career goals and determine what coursework would be best for them. So here we have a comparison between what we consider, again, the OGA pathway, which is the double accelerated, and the single accelerated pathway. And I want to make note that if you notice, almost in either pathway, there is access to the highest level of our AP coursework in science, which is typically AP Physics C. So both pathways can access it, and we'll talk a little bit about how each can do it. In the off-grade acceleration pathway, the student starts with taking Regents Life Science Biology in grade 7. Remember, that is a recommended program, right? The student must be recommended based on our criteria that we reviewed earlier, as opposed to the single accelerated pathway, which is self-select. So at that point, a self-selection is you and your family with the guidance of middle school guidance counseling, as well as the teachers, have a conversation related to the student's abilities, and then you make a choice. Do I want my child to be single accelerated or not? Either way, you'll notice that both the OGA or double accelerated and the Regents, the single accelerated, both take Regents Earth Science in grade 8. Okay, so you'll see that Regents Earth and Space both in grade 8. So our single accelerated is the only difference is in grade 7. For all other our double accelerated is Regents Life Science Biology in grade 7. All other single accelerated students would just take grade 7 science. So a lot of times I get this question, what is the acceleration for the single accelerated in science in 7th grade? There is no single acceleration in 7th grade in science, unlike math. Okay, so I just want to make sure that's clear. So you'll notice that in this particular pathway, in the single accelerated, the students now are 1 year ahead, right? They've taken Regents, Earth, and Space in their grade 8 year. That will go on their high school transcript. Okay, so that's part of the conversations that we want to have, is as we make these selections, these values and numbers will go on their transcripts, which then actually sets a permanent mark right towards their college career. So we want to make sure that they're successful, right, as we're making these choices. We really want to protect the transcript. So they move on to take Regents Life Science Biology, and then they go to chemistry in grade 10, and now that opens up the door for any of those choices below, which are primarily our AP coursework. A double acceleration actually can happen here in grade 11, and I guess the pointer's not working. In the blue box, you'll notice on the single accelerated pathway, some students will elect to take AP Physics 1 at that point, and AP Physics 1 is essentially a double acceleration because those students are taking Regents Physics exam, the New York State, as well as the AP exam. So they're taking both in that one course. It's a double period every day. The difference between the two columns of off-grade acceleration and single acceleration that I really want to make note is that when the student takes Regents Life Science Biology in grade 7, that does not go in their high school transcript. However, New York State diploma requirements state that a student must take a course in life science on their high school transcript. And so therefore, our students take AP Biology right in that double acceleration pathway. They absolutely must. You'll notice there is no must take AP Biology in the single accelerated pathway because they earn their Regents Life Science Biology credit in grade 9, which is on the high school transcript naturally. So this again is a lot to digest. You may need to mull it over when you get home, and you can certainly ask us questions afterwards. But one of the biggest things is, if you notice on the bottom as we look at grade 12, it's access. Based on whichever course that your child is ready for, we provide pathway and avenue to access the highest level courses all along the way. They can all get to AP Physics C. There are different ways to get there. So now that brings us to some of our questions on the frequently asked questions that we've received for students from parents regarding our programs. What percentage of students are enrolled each year? And typically it's about 10% of our students get enrolled in what we call the OGA program each year from either math or science.
And I also want to point out with that OGA, when students are entering off-grade acceleration in grade 7, that is the criteria that Ms. Libertini and I talked about. So that is not, those OGA courses are not open enrollment. We choose who is going into those OGA courses. So you will have the option to choose if you want your child to accelerate or not accelerate. We will give recommendations, but you don't have to necessarily follow the recommendations. We may recommend that your child take Math 7. Maybe you want your child to take Math 7 accelerated. That's perfectly fine, you can do that, that is no problem. But when it comes to accelerating 2 years above grade level, that's when we have criteria, okay? Because we have to make sure, it's our responsibility to make sure that the students are at the correct level of readiness. We want them to be appropriately challenged, but we don't want them in over their head. And as a sidebar, we do have an obligation to protect the transcript. So, moving on with our questions, do we offer accreditation from other institutions? So in math, we do, if a student wants to take a course over the summer in lieu of taking pre-calculus in Jericho, I do have an approved list of courses from local colleges or universities, so that is an option.
When we think about science, remember I reminded you that that there is an age requirement by colleges, right? And the second thing is that New York State requires that there be a specific number of lab minutes that a student partakes in order to earn the credit for the course. And so we abide by both the outside institutional rules as well as the lab minutes. I have a series of institutions that I've previously approved. And the students then come and sit and meet with me and they say, look, I'm interested in taking this. This is, again, only for the purposes in science for single accelerations. This is a student that was in a regular pathway and now has decided I want to enter the single acceleration pathway. Remember, it happens in the summer of the 10th grade year, so as they're a rising junior, and then they start that process early in the spring. They have some conversations with me. We take a look at where they are in terms of grades and whether or not they would fit the mold for taking an outside college-level chemistry course.
So another question that we're often asked are OGA math and science separated? In other words, can you be in off-grade accelerated math and not in science or vice versa? So yes, we do look at them independently. They are separated.
But it's always important for us to think about where the student is mathematically and whether or not they're academically then ready for some of the higher level sciences. So that's something that you always want to take into consideration.
In terms of the scope of the assessment exams, keep in mind that we are looking at multiple measures, which we showed you on a previous slide. In terms of one of those multiple measures is the AMC 8 for math. So students who would like to be considered for off-grade acceleration, I do need them to take the AMC 8 as one of those data points. And I do use that to determine their, in part, their levels. And Ms. Libertini, you want to talk about your science OGA?
Sure. We offer the science OGA assessment in the spring. That is a requirement in order for them to be considered for OGA placement in science in grade 7. The question was, are there cut scores? Essentially what we do is we don't apply cut scores. Cut scores would be really, really easy, right? But a lot of times they overlook a lot of characteristics that we really want to consider in terms of whether or not a student is academically ready. So we triangulate the data, which really means when we talked about, we looked at grades, we look at NWEA scores, we look at all of those practices in both math and science, we look at the results of the AMC 8 and science OGA assessment. We don't just look at one number and we don't use one cutoff threshold, right? We want to identify what does the child look like as a whole, how are they in terms of critically thinking and problem solving in both or either of our disciplines, and are they academically and ready for the demands of this type of course.
And as Ms. Libertini said, because we triangulate the data, there could be a score that I'm using as a ballpark on the AMC, let's say in the top 25%. But if a student scores slightly below that and all of the other measures are very, very high, I'm still going to consider that student for OGA. A question, probably one of the most popular questions that I hear is, how do students prepare for the OGA tests? I'm hearing all sorts of hiring tutors and going to different places for test prep. There really is no need for that if the purpose of double acceleration is to be where your child is ready for, right? So it's about readiness level. Yes, there are previous AMC 8 contests that are available on the MAA website, but remember, these questions aren't memorization. It's not rote, it's problem solving. It's problem solving skills and thinking outside of the box. So we would almost rather, we want to meet the kids where they are. We don't really want them to test prep and have them possibly enter a course that they're not ready for.
The same is true for the science placement exam. It's going to cover a series of topics, some of which your child will have already been exposed to, and some of which your child has not yet been exposed to, and that's completely okay. We want to identify whether or not, if they're faced with a scientific problem, what does their reasoning look like? How does their ability to articulate their thoughts and process on paper look? Right? How are they applying some scientific principles to problem solve? Can they combine principles that they might have learned from physics and chemistry and some earth science to solve a problem? So none of this is something that you can open up a book and memorize key facts and then do successful on, right? Or be successful on. So that's really important. We don't want you to be reaching outside to help the student bolster their overall grades so they get into OGA, and then we place them into a course, and this next question really addresses some of the things that might happen.
So if your child is in either an accelerated math or science class or a double accelerated course, what types of support is available? How can we help them? Can we provide additional resources? So the fact is, we of course, extra help is always available. That's with any course. But in terms of AIS, our Academic Intervention Services, that's not available for acceleration. So if your child is going to need a lot of additional support, that's really something to consider when going into an accelerated class or a double accelerated class, because in the middle school, that system is not built in. Those AIS classes are available, but not for the accelerated students.
And the pacing is going to be on par with what the expectations are and the scope and sequence are for a Regents level course, right? And that's really, really important for everyone to understand. So can students who initially don't qualify for the program join later if they show progress during the school year? So I guess we can break this up into two parts. One is, if the student is in 7th grade, was not recommended for OGA, right? Can we then place them into OGA midway through 7th grade? That is impossible in either of our programs, because they have already then missed a large portion, right, of the Regents level coursework, and they will be so far behind that it will be a struggle for them to then not only keep pace with what's happening, but catch up from what they missed. So that's not an option. The second thing is if a student then later in the pathway, so years later, decides that they would like to be part of the single acceleration pathway, we talked about all the options that we have that can get them there.
We received a question about state testing and how it's relative to the sequence that the students are following. So in our 3 through 8 testing program, if a student is, for example, if a student is in either 7th grade or 8th grade taking Algebra 1, they are not taking the New York State Math 7 assessment, nor are they taking the New York State Math 8 assessment. They're taking the Algebra 1 Regents exam. That's their assessment. So the assessment will align with the course that they are in.
So in science, we only give one assessment in the middle school grade band, and that happens in grade 8 science. So if a student is double accelerated, they would not take the grade 8 science test from the state. And if the student is single accelerated, they would not take the grade 8 science test because they would be in 8th grade, both cohorts would be in Earth and Space Science taking a Regents exam. What is the expected homework and project load for students in these classes compared to their regular courses? The demands of these courses are Regents demands, so the expectations would be that there should be homework that is supporting what's happening inside the classroom for teachers to be able to assess the academic progress of a student and students themselves to be able to assess where they are and what their needs are. And then in terms of the project load for science, there are a wealth of laboratory requirements that they need to meet for those 1,200 lab minutes in any of the Regents courses. So you'll see that routinely there's also a lab period that's associated with any of the science courses. So they may be finishing up labs in terms of homework, but most of that lab work are, primary projects and activities are associated inside the coursework.
So let's talk the second to last question. If a student is placed in an accelerated course but is really struggling, this question is basically asking, is there an off-ramp, right? Can I go back to a non-accelerated class? That could be tricky. We are going to be talking about a deadline. We're looking at December 1st. But keep in mind, if a student is already down that pathway, maybe a student has already completed Algebra 1, for example, the next course is geometry. There's no going back to Algebra 1 after you've taken it. If you're really struggling as an 8th grader in Algebra 1, and if we have room in a Math 8 class, we could conceivably put you back in Math 8. I will say those things are pretty rare, at least for math. We have maybe a handful of students sometimes who want that off-ramp.
So sometimes also in science we see some of those requests for the off-ramp option. What happens in science is if a student is in Earth and Space Science in grade 8 in our single accelerated pathway, and as we approach the end of marking period 1, we're seeing that they're really struggling. We offer grade 8 science, which is also an Earth Science Foundations course, so they are able to slide back into a grade 8 science. The further down, similar to math, once you get towards that December deadline, it's impossible to try and slide out. Now you've taken most of the course, so now you're in that pathway and you need to proceed. Which is again why we want you to be really, really thoughtful, right, about the students and their academic readiness. Do not get tutors to bolster their overall achievement, because essentially then these things show up as the student navigates through the successive coursework.
There were several questions that came in about Math Olympiads. So Math Olympiads is not part of the accelerated program. Math Olympiads is a club. So it's a club for 6th graders. We also have it in the elementary school in grade 5. It continues in grade 6. When students are interested in double accelerating, I do take a look. I look at all of the data that comes in, so I will look at Math Olympiad data to see how they're doing in Math Olympiads, but it's really not part of the accelerated program. There was another question about Math Olympiads. How does it continue? So in 7th and 8th grade and into the high school, it goes from Math Olympiads to Mathletes. But again, those are clubs and it's separate from the curriculum. We could turn up the lights. Okay, that's a lot of light, but okay. So if there are any takeaways, I hope that you know, first of all, that you will not make a mistake when deciding if your child should go into accelerated or non-accelerated in 7th grade, okay? So I don't want you to feel pressure, like if my child isn't accelerated, then he's going to be behind. It's not true. They can always join that pathway later, and you'll see when you have time to really go through our pathways how that can happen. Off-grade acceleration, we choose students for off-grade acceleration based on multiple measures of data. Only about 10% of the kids are going to wind up, at least that's what it typically has been, in off-grade acceleration. If your child expresses interest in off-grade acceleration and your child, we determine, is not ready for that, it means they're not ready at this point in time. It doesn't mean they're never going to be ready. They could jump on in another pathway, both in math and science. Those are the two takeaways that I could think of. Ms. Libertini?
I think I could just underscore the same thing. We talked about access, right? We provided multiple ways for students to be able to have access to our highest level courses. Please let us work with you, right? And the outstanding teams that we have here to support students help to guide that process.
Are there any other questions that we did not foresee? Yes. That's a great question. So the question is, how do students sign up for the AMC test? So the AMC 8 is open right now. It should be on your child's math teacher's Canvas page. There's a link to sign up. It's just a Google form. I collect the names, and then I will be sending out confirmation emails indicating that your child is signed up, and then there'll be next steps after that. But there is a link available. It is a Google form.
Same goes through for the science placement. We actually send those notifications out much later in the year. We wait until January to start giving announcements because our test is not until March.
And someone else had a question, I think. Yes.
In regards to math, when you do the OGA, I see that 7 and 8 are basically skipped. Is there anything being lost in skipping 7 and 8?
So the question is, with off-grade acceleration, 7th and 8th grade are being skipped. Thank you, Kim, for going back to that. Okay. So off-grade acceleration, okay, so when that's an excellent question. When a student comes out of grade 6 math and we go through all of that, how they've done on everything, their problem solving, their grades, the rubric, everything, and if we determine that they're ready for algebra, I do understand that it's a big jump. It's a big jump from math 6 to Algebra 1, which in a non-accelerated class it's a 9th grade class. So is there curriculum that is missed? Yes. But we're determining that we have a group of students who are ready to jump into algebra and they already have those prerequisite skills. We would never identify someone for OGA if we did not feel very confident that they can do it. And that's why we're super careful about who we select for that, because it's a big jump. And it's a very, very good question that you asked, because it's all of 7th grade and all of 8th grade math that will not be, they won't be in courses for that. So it's an excellent question. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
You mentioned all the things to look at for double accelerated. How are kids chosen or selected for accelerated?
So the question is, we outlined what we look at for double accelerated, but what do we look at when making recommendations for single accelerated? We have to add these to our frequently asked questions for next time, because these are good ones. So as a team, we sit down with the core teachers and the guidance counselors and the building administrators, Ms. Balut and Mr. Gleason, and we actually have a conversation. We talk about every student and what the teachers are recommending for the following year, based on all of the data that the teachers have and that the guidance counselors have. and we make a recommendation. But that's all it is, it's a recommendation. So if you decide that you don't want your child to go to acceleration and we're recommending acceleration, that's fine, and vice versa. So that's part of our open enrollment policy, but we do make recommendations so that you have somewhat of a guide as to what you think, what we're recommending. But I do promise you this, if we recommend Math 7 and you choose Math 7 Accelerated, no one is going to be saying, you shouldn't have gone into Math 7 Accelerated. No, we're going to support that. We're going to be cheerleaders for your success, no matter what. Any other questions? Yes.
How do sixth graders get this information? When it's outside, sixth graders talk to them, but they talk to us as far as time. I don't have a positive education from the US, so I don't even know what it means. But just to have an idea that friends. My first one child, I don't even have something
So that's an excellent question, and we actually discussed that. The idea of the sixth grade teachers themselves reviewing some of this process with them, and then as well as the counselors. So that will be happening in the upcoming months as we approach the decision time of whether or not students want to sign up for each of the accelerated offerings.
So for those of you who didn't hear, the question is, how does this information that we're giving to you here translating to actually getting to the students so that the students understand? So that's something that we could make an outreach in their math and science classes and with their guidance counselor. We will make sure that the students are aware of these different options. Well, we really appreciate, we have one more question, I'm so sorry. Usually in April, I think, we let them know. So by the time we gather all of the data, where it's around March, and then it's usually in April-ish, springtime. So this is not your only opportunity. If you leave here and you discover that you had a question and you didn't want to raise your hand or you just didn't think of it, we are here all the time. So you can call us, you can email us, you will find us, and we're happy to answer any questions. This is not the only opportunity. We appreciate so much that you came tonight. We hope we answered all of your questions, and we'll hang out for a few minutes in case you have any more questions. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.